On this week's Eastern Conference edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, our Eastern Conference previews continue with the Florida Panthers, the Boston Bruins, the Detroit Red Wings, and Montreal Canadiens.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of the Locked On NHL podcast. It's your team every day. Today's Wednesday, September 27th, and we want to remind you to like and subscribe wherever you download your podcast. You can find Locked On NHL on YouTube. We also have local experts on the biggest stories 5 days a week, your favorite team. So go make sure you subscribe to Locked On Maple Leafs, where my co-host, Mike DiStefano, plies his trade. You can follow me at Ross Levitan with Locked On Senators. Mike, our two teams just had back-to-back preseason games. Not much of a battle of Ontario. The Sens take both.
Come on, man. Come on. The last game went to overtime. You're going to tell me there wasn't a battle. Yeah, I guess hats off to you. You won a couple preseason games. We'll see once the puck drops where everything shakes out. I think I have a little more confidence in my club and the success they're about to have this season than yours. I'll say this, though, and this is maybe a PSA to, all the fan bases, everyone out there listening. Don't be upset if your team loses a preseason game. They mean jack. Like, they do not matter whatsoever. But often, and this is more so the reason, when these guys are playing preseason games, first and foremost, I mean, you got a bunch of AHLers and rookies playing. Sometimes you'll have a stacked lineup on one team versus a rookie or a minor-centric lineup on another. So, like, the roster disparity sometimes can be big, and that could be a reason for a loss. So don't be upset if that is the case. But ultimately, a lot of these coaches like to do in preseason is they like to put guys in, some uncomfortable positions that they wouldn't normally be in, and basically see, like, can they handle this? Like a guy who typically isn't known as a, stellar defensive player. Maybe they play them a little more in the defensive end just to see, okay, let's get some tape. Let's get some film. Let's see what the habits look like. And then maybe we can try and coach it out of them or tell them, okay, this is where you should be. This is how you correct this. So, when a team loses, like I got swarmed in the comment section on our Monday or Tuesday episode of Locked On Leafs because we were coming across apparently as apologists for the Maple Leafs because the result didn't matter to us, the fact that they lost. I mean, the Leafs outshot Ottawa like 31-4, 31-8 in the last two periods. Like, look, the process is more important than the result. And people are just like, oh, but a loss is a loss. Of course, you always lose games. And I can't believe that you have an excuse for these bums. I'm like, it's preseason, man. Like, the games don't matter. And oftentimes, it's just guys getting their legs underneath them and trying different things, trying to build chemistry. These games truly do not matter. So if your team is out there and they've lost a game or two in preseason, don't fret, don't sweat, don't lose sleep over it. It really does not matter. It's just a chance for guys to get their legs under them and for coaches to just, get a look and, put some guys in some different situations and see what they're all about.
That's a good PSA. Obviously, I say my piece there at the top, tongue-in-cheek, but it's all about watching your favorite players do well and hoping to see the up-and-coming players also show off. Like your boy Easton Cowan, who I thought was one of the best players on the ice in that Monday game, Sens and Leafs. For more on those games, though, check us out, Locked On Senders, Locked On Maple Leafs, because this is a continuation of our season previews on Locked On NHL. We're going to have local experts on this as well next week, I believe. Mike and I are going to sit down and weave through. We've got season previews with each host where we're going to ask them questions, 5 to 10 minute segments, and you'll be able to be all fired up, not only for your season, but for your fantasy hockey draft as well. Those are all coming across the tube. And we've got Steele Roden and Flip Livingstone as well, Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast. So go check them out wherever you get your podcasts, including on YouTube. Mikey, I think we should start with the Boston Bruins. I mean, I'd say they earned it based on their play last season, a historic regular season. And well, they scratched and were scratched and clawed by the Cats in the first round of the playoffs. Like, how would you summarize the Bruins last season, and how do you think they're going to carry, if any, momentum into this year?
Disappointing, I guess, has to be the word, that I'm going to use. We want to use a little word association Wednesday. I think disappointment has to be the one that you'll use there, because, they had a historic regular season. They were the greatest regular season team in history based off of, the wins and the points and whatnot. And then just to come up short in the playoffs by losing when you had a lead in that series, and you lost to the Florida Panthers who just snuck in. It was definitely disappointing. And then, it got a little worse later on in the summer when you found out that your captain and star forward Patrice Bergeron was going to hang up the skates and retire. David Krejci, his longtime friend, kind of joins him in retirement. And now you're sitting here for the Boston Bruins, and you're thinking to yourself, was last year, that final, opportunity for us to win a championship with that core? And I'm curious to see how this year is going to kind of turn out for them, because it's, not as good a team. I think everybody looks at it and says Pavel Zacha doesn't necessarily scream first line center. Charlie Coyle, Morgan Geekie, like these are the three centermen they have down the middle. And that's a far cry from what they had a season ago. So it's going to be interesting to see, what they're going to be able to do. I know they brought in, James Van Riemsdyk. They brought in that Geekie kid. Milan Lucic is back. But ultimately, I still look at this group and I say, man, I don't see them being a shade of what they were a year ago. And they're going to be scratched and clawed to make the playoffs this year, coming off a season where they were the best team ever.
So my immediate reaction is very similar to that. But then I look deeper. They still had David Pastrnak, who scored 60-plus goals. They still have the reigning Vezina Trophy winner in Linus Ullmark. They still have the reigning coach of the year in Jim Montgomery. I just feel like there's so much skill around them. They still have a number one defenseman in Charlie McAvoy, a top defenseman on any team in the league. And Hampus Lindholm is one of the best all-around defensemen. So it just feels like, even though, strength down the middle is how most NHL teams are built. So now that is clearly not the strength of the Boston Bruins. Like, I don't think that I'm as high on them as FanDuel is. FanDuel has them as the 8th best odds to win the Stanley Cup this year, Mikey.
Yeah, they got him, which is kind of surprising, I would say, for sure. I'm looking at a couple of the teams that they have, behind them, who I probably would feel more comfortable betting on them. I think their time is over. Like I thought last year they were going to take a step back, and they didn't. They actually turned out to be a pretty great team. But I think this is finally the year that we see the Boston Bruins start to fall off here, especially with the way that the conference and the division has strengthened. They're the Red Wings are going to get some more points. The Buffalo Sabres and your Ottawa Senators are going to pick up some points. And I think a lot of those points will be up for grabs in those games that weren't last year with the Bruins being so stellar. So I think they're going to be a dogfight. Could they make the playoffs? Sure. It's not going to surprise me if they make the playoffs. I'm not saying if they're not a playoff team or they don't have, the talent or the roster to make a playoff push. But do I see them as cup contenders like they have been for the last decade plus? That's where I think they've fallen out of that conversation with the offseason losses.
Who's the X factor to you on the Boston Bruins?
The X factor, I mean, it's in what way? Because ultimately, I think you could look at it and be like, David Pastrnak could put this team on his back and be an X factor. But at the same time, I think Pavel Zacha, if he can take a next step, like this is a top 10 pick. People forget years ago with the Devils, but if he could take that next step and, be a top talent, maybe he could actually replace some of what they're losing, with Bergeron and Krejci. Obviously he's not going to be them. That's very clear, but if he could be a little bit better of a player, maybe, that'll be good enough for them to be a playoff team. So maybe Pavel Zacha could be that X factor for them.
I was a little surprised that they didn't make a move from a position of strength, which is goaltending, and go get a centerman this offseason.
Yeah, it seemed like there's a lot of chatter about them and potentially people linking, either Swayman or Allmark with one of the centers that were out there potentially via trade. And I know like you're a guy who's out in Winnipeg and Scheifele and Dubois were two guys who were kind of on the block and two centermen that could be had. And if they're going to move on from Hellebuck, you bring in, another goaltender. So I know that there was always that link there, and there's some other centermen around the NHL. Elias Lindholm was another one who was frequently brought up throughout the offseason as a potential target for the Boston Bruins, but they didn't end up making any moves. There's still time to get a deal done and to bolster that center core, that center group, if they still plan on, being as competitive as they can be. But as it stands right now, it looks like they're in camp with the group they have. You got a new man with the captaincy and Brad Marchand, and we'll see what the Bruins can do.
Finally, with the Bruins, do you have them in or out of the playoffs? This might be the hardest team to project.
I think they missed the playoffs. Like I know it's crazy when you look at the team and how many wins they had last year and how many points and projecting, could they really be a 40-point less team? Like, yeah, I think they can. Like, I think they got really lucky last year. They got hot, and I just think that this season it's not going to go their way as much as it did last year. Like, it is possible that they could drop 40 more points than they did a season ago. So the way that team has really, or the way the division has strengthened, I think that the Bruins might be one of the teams that fall out of it here.
I'm going to say they're in. I just can't. I bet against them last year. It didn't go well. I think they're battling for that third or wild card team with the team we're going to get to next, the Florida Panthers. But a reminder that Ian McLaren has you covered at Locked On Bruins 5 days a week. So make sure you go subscribe to Locked On Bruins for more on the historic team that was and what could be this upcoming season in Boston. All right, coming up next, we got the Cats, we got the Red Wings and Canadiens all next. You're listening to Locked On NHL. Today's episode is brought to you by DoorDash. New sponsor alert. Do you love convenience? Then go with DoorDash. DoorDash grocery delivery as well. You can stock up for the week or order last-minute cravings conveniently. You burnt your last piece of toast? Is your avocados gone bad? I suffer from that each and every week. But the hot sauce bottle, when that's empty too, you got to get it all together with DoorDash. You can try grocery delivery there. You'll get everything you want delivered when you need it right to your door. You've trusted DoorDash for years to get your restaurant favorites, and now you can get grocery delivery as well. With thousands of stores to choose from, you'll get the best in your neighborhood and boost your local economy with each and every order. You'll get exactly what you ordered. We'll make it just right. So sit back and get quality groceries just like you picked them yourself. You want even more value? You can save on all your grocery and restaurant favorites with a $0 delivery fee on all eligible orders with a Dash Pass membership. So get 50% off your first DoorDash order up to a $20 value when you use code LOCKED at checkout. It's a limited time offer. Terms apply. That's 50% off up to $20, no minimum subtotal, and $0 delivery fees on your first order when you download the DoorDash app in the App Store and enter code LOCKED. Don't forget, that's code LOCKED for 50% off your first order with DoorDash. Welcome back, Locked On NHL season preview for the Florida Panthers. The Cats, they earned their spot in the playoffs, battling through the last half of the season, and then they made it all the way to the conference final, and then even beyond that, where they, well, I don't think I want to remind Cats how the Stanley Cup final went. So that's why I went with the East final, because that had to be the highlight of the season, right? The Carolina Hurricanes, geographically kind of close, former division rivals, but now obviously they're separated. But Mikey, this Cats team, they had a lot of injuries through that playoff run. Brandon Montour, it seems like he's going to be ready to go, if not at the start of the season, soon after. Matthew Tkachuk sounds like he's 100% healthy. And this Cats team, I mean, there's two X factors. It's, can Matthew Tkachuk repeat the MVP-like season that he had last year? And what Sergei Bobrovsky are we going to get?
Yeah, for me, I think it's Bobrovsky. Like I have full confidence that Kachuk is going to continue to be a pest and continue to be a productive player and MVP type player like he was a season ago. I just think he's that good of a player. But what are you going to get out of the goaltending position? What are you going to get from Sergei Bobrovsky? Like, you say they clawed their way into the playoffs last year. It wasn't because of Bobrovsky. It was a guy by the name of Alex Lyon, who's no longer even with the team, who actually carried them into the playoffs and started for them in the first couple games of the playoffs before eventually going back to Bobrovsky, who clearly got on a heater, a run, dummied the Maple Leafs, dummied the Carolina Hurricanes before kind of falling back to earth in that series against the Vegas Golden Knights. Go ahead.
It wasn't a sweep, though.
What wasn't a sweep?
Against Carolina, remember?
Oh, yeah. Nah, wasn't a sweep. If you watch the games, it wasn't a sweep. They lost 4, but it wasn't a sweep. Yeah, what a comment. What a comment from Rod the Bod. Well, but goaltending is always going to be the question mark for me with them.
Well, with the Florida Panthers last year, what shocked me is how much offense they got from their back end. I was looking it up, and Boston had 39 goals from the blue line. Vegas had 36. Tampa had 33. Ottawa had 30. Toronto had 27. The Florida Panthers had 53 goals from their blue line last year.
Montour had like almost 80 points. It was insane the season that guy had. And which is funny because coming into the year, I famously predicted one of my hot takes, I guess, bold predictions of last season was that the President's Trophy winning Florida Panthers were going to miss the playoffs. And my reasoning was because I looked at that blue line at the beginning of the year and I said, outside of Aaron Ekblad, they got nothing. There's nothing else that is there. Well, Brandon Montour stepped up and he became a player. You had Gustav Forsling, who became, a top 4 guy for them. Ratko Gudas played a pretty good role. And Aaron Ekblad obviously was able to stay healthy for most of the season, which really helped them, become the team that they became. Mark Stahl was a serviceable player for them as well. So they ended up being all right defensively. And Montour is really the guy who I think made that all possible. But ultimately, this is a team that I think is also going to be very much just like last year, scraping and clawing right up until the end of the year to try and get into a playoff spot here. There's an opportunity for them to finish in the top 3 and then not have to worry about a wild card, but they're going to be a team right in that mix with the Buffaloes, the Detroits, the Bostons, kind of fighting for those final, 3 spots, 3rd spot, and then even, the crossover with the Metro for once the wild card comes into effect as well.
Yeah, I like what they did in the offseason in terms of bringing in some depth pieces. Evan Rodriguez, a guy I've been high on for a couple of years, almost had 40 points in under 70 games last year. They gave him a 4-year deal at $3 million per. Their D-corps is in a state of transition. The only defenseman that they have signed beyond this upcoming season is Nico Mikkola. That's it. Everyone else is a free agent after this season, whether it's restricted or unrestricted. And sorry, that is of the players who are healthy right now. They still have Ekblad on the injured reserve. He has 2 years left. But even Brandon Montour is going into the final year of his contract. So you have Montour, you have Forsling, both UFAs after this season. You brought in some depth where it's basically like they brought in 5 guys and they only expect 1 or 2 of them to need to play. Right? Like between Oliver Ekman-Larsson, Mike Riley, Dmitry Kulikov, like you brought all those guys in. You're like, okay, one of them has to be able to, either carry the weight or we'll keep rotating through a few of them. So this whole Florida Panthers preview comes down to one thing. It's what Sergei Bobrovsky are you going to get? Are you going to get the guy who had a .901 save percentage in the regular season or the guy who had a .915 save percentage in the playoffs? If it's the former, they miss. If it's the latter, they're in. It's as simple as that for me.
Yeah, I'm with you, man. And it's a scary thing to think about, especially if you're a Panthers fan, that your season's going to come down to who's been probably the most inconsistent goaltender on the planet in the last, decade and a half, with good season, bad season, good season, bad season. And, he's coming off a Stanley Cup run. So if memory serves correct, that probably means a bad year might be coming up for old Bobrovsky.
The Florida Panthers have a plus 2,000 odds to win the Stanley Cup with our friends over at FanDuel. That is the 11th best odds in the National Hockey League. I don't know if I like that one. I know you've got the team points totals. I've actually got them up here as well. Team points is 98.5. I will be taking the under, which seems to be the more popular option. It's minus 120 on the under, minus 106 above. But there's no Alex Lyon to steal games down the stretch because Alex Lyon is with the Detroit Red Wings, who we're going to preview next. We got Red Wings and Habs next. You're listening to the season previews on the Locked On NHL podcast. Welcome back, Locked On NHL Eastern Conference season previews. A reminder that you can follow the shows on Locked On NHL's channel. You can find Locked On Panthers with Armando Velez over at Locked On Florida Panthers. Okay, turning our attention to the Detroit Red Wings. Mikey, we got to make sure we're nice to these people because we talked about Detroit over the summer. Obviously, Ottawa and Detroit have been getting into online mid-offs, we'll call it, between the two clubs with the DeBrincat trade and all of that. But I just don't think the team's ready. I'm not on the side where it's like, oh, wow, like the Yzer plan's a failure. I truly think they are on the right track. But they went out and Yzerman pretty much did what Florida did in terms of bringing in veteran defensemen to bridge the gap. I mean, with Florida, it's more like, let's figure it out. Whereas for Detroit, they have young defensemen coming, most notably Seaman Edvinsson. But overall, like, I think they're a year away from being in the mix with the Floridas, the Bostons, the Buffaloes, even Ottawa. Like, they're trying to make that step. I think Detroit, if they miss the playoffs, it should not be considered a failure as long as the young kids are playing up to the standard and showing that they're taking the next step in their development.
Yeah, I mean, I personally think it's more likely they miss than make. So absolutely, it should not be seen as a failure. You just want to see that there's, some steps that are being taken forward by some of the young guys that you mentioned, like the Moritz Seider. Can he bounce back? And can he have another good season? Lucas Raymond, can he have a good year? There's some other guys out there. Jonathan Berggren is a pretty talented player who's going to get an opportunity to play for this team this season. And, I kind of did scratch my head a little bit at some of the additions that were made this offseason for this team, like signing JT Compher to a long-term deal didn't make a whole lot of sense to me after they had already signed Andrew Kopp last year, kind of similar dudes. That one was just kind of a head scratcher. They obviously brought in Justin Hall, who I'm very familiar with here in Toronto, bringing him in on a juicy contract. I thought was an interesting play for the Yzer plan. And then they went and they brought Jeff Petrie into the fold as well. We'll see if Jeff Petrie can kind of regain his form as a legitimate top four NHLer. But it's been a couple of years, and the wheels on that car aren't quite as new as they used to be. The tread's getting a little worn there. So it's going to be interesting to see what this group can do. I am surprised though that they don't have Seaman Edvinsson playing some meaningful minutes, because I think, and not mean like third pair minutes, like give him third pair minutes. Why you felt the need to go out and sign all of these, journeyman / third pair old defensemen, as opposed to giving one of your young guys an opportunity in what's a year where you're looking to get some people to make the jump, some of your prospects to make that jump, is still kind of, a curious move in my eyes, but it's the Yzer plan. I guess you got to just trust blindly, right?
Yeah, I mean, they're in a situation now, I think, where they're happy with, like, I'm just concerned about the term that they gave these guys. Like you said, like, it's one thing to bring in veterans to, keep the ship sailing while you're trying to get those high-end prospects in the lineup. I just didn't think they needed to commit 3 years to Justin Hall, and 3 more years they have for Ben Sherrod. And, even I know they got DeBrincat for 4 years, and I'm not going to open that can of worms, but Andrew Kopp, I think you'd probably want some more from him out of 5.625. He was average, I'd say, last year. And you mentioned the JT Compher, just the term that they were throwing out there. So I don't really see them competing this year. I think a high pick wouldn't be the worst thing for them. I know that the Red Wings fans are going to flood my mentions again and tell me how much of an idiot I am. That's all right. I will say a guy who doesn't get enough shine, but who's a very good defenseman, is Jake Wallman. And I'm interested to see if he and Seider are going to be the pair long-term that can take this team back to relevance. Because, they haven't won a playoff series since they moved back to the Eastern Conference, eh? They haven't made playoffs.
Yeah, well, they've been terrible the last few years, so that doesn't surprise me, I suppose. I'm just looking at their cap friendly right now. I completely forgot signed with them this offseason.
Who's that?
James Reimer. James Reimer is the Detroit Red Wing, which it means Alex Lyon probably not even going to be on an NHL roster to start the season. Considering how he ended last season, that's kind of wild.
It is very interesting. And then you look at Ville Husso, who they bet on, and he's got 2 years left at 4.75. He needs to be better as well. He had games where he was just not good enough to win. So the Detroit Red Wings, I have them on the outs versus in their over-under is set at 86.5 points, and under is minus 106. Over is minus 120. So I'm going to sprinkle in on the under on that one. I have them out. How about you?
I have them out of the playoffs, but that's a good number at 86.5. Like, I can see them hitting 87, 88 points. I might take a flyer on the over. Like, they finished with, 80 points a season ago.
I'm getting flashbacks, though, unfortunately, because my Ottawa Senators had their over-under was 86.5 last year, and they finished with 86.
It could happen, man. Well, Detroit lost their last 4 games of the regular season. If they would have won 3 of them, they would have hit 86. So
that would have been 20% of their wins all season, though.
Fair enough. So I'm going to take the over just slightly, though. Like, I'm thinking 87, 88 points max.
All right.
Not a playoff team.
Yeah, and I want to be clear, I'm not a math guy either. That percentage points was probably not right on. But our friends Brian Fisher and Scotty Bentley over at Locked On Red Wings will keep you posted on everything you need to know with the Detroit Red Wings. All right, wrapping up our season previews today with the Montreal Canadiens. Who better to preview the Montreal Canadiens than a Sens fan and a Leafs fan?
Yeah, maybe a Canadiens fan, but no one wants to hear from those people.
No, but you can if you want. Laura Saba and Scott Matla over at Locked On Canadiens. This is a team that I think needs another high-end pick. I think that should be the goal this season. They've got some really elite prospects, and some of them aren't even in the organization yet in terms of Lane Hudson, a guy who I'm super high on, undersized defenseman, but has so much talent and so much skill. He's at Boston University. So I think Habs fans might be just as interested watching Boston University this year because Macklin Celebrini, a projected top 3 pick in this upcoming draft, is there too. So the BU Canadiens, potentially, I think a lot of Habs fans would be happy to hear that. But I think if you're the Canadiens, like, it's individual players versus team success this year. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, like I think it's yes, where this is a group that they're still young and you still want to see guys taking steps. That said, like, they kind of made some additions that make you think that they want to be a little bit more competitive, that it's not necessarily, an organization that wants a first overall pick again. Like, you think about going out and giving up draft picks to bring in Alex Newhook and signing him to a long-term deal. They just recently traded for Tanner Pearson to bring in a veteran, top 9 type of guy. They've ended up bringing back Sean Monahan. So there are some moves that were made over the offseason that make me think that this team still wants to be somewhat competitive. But I guess we'll see how good those guys can be. It's ultimately, this is a playoff team. They're not ready to make that next step yet, but I think there's a lot of young talent on this squad. Like, I think a full year, hopefully Yuri Slafkovsky can be healthy this season. He can put forward a pretty good year after not being able to play a whole lot last year. I think you want to see a bit more out of Nick Suzuki, Cole Caulfield. Hopefully he can stay healthy as well. And
he needs to play a full season. Cole Caulfield hasn't played a full season yet.
No, he hasn't. And, which is unfortunate because he's such an integral part of what that team is all about and how they have success. Like, that dude can score goals, man. So when he's not on the ice and he's not the threat that he needs to be for the Montreal Canadiens, they're going to suffer. And they have suffered the last couple of years when he's out of the lineup. So he certainly is going to have to try and stay healthy all season long because his progression is everything, right? I think that he's the guy. He got paid. He's someone who's going to have to start putting up goals left, right, and center for this team to be successful. But ultimately, it's just going to be another year of growing pains, but hopefully they have some young guys who could take the next step.
And it's all about getting guys into the lineup for an extended period of time, Mikey, because you look at what Montreal had last year. They had Nick Suzuki played all 82 games. Jonathan Kovacevic played 77, and nobody else played 70 or more games. Like, they were banged up all season long. And then Josh Anderson played 69. Mike Hoffman played 67. He's not even there anymore. But, like, their top-end guys, like Kirby Dach played 58 games. You had I'm just scrolling down. Mike Matheson only played 48 games. Cole Caulfield played 46. Caden Gooley played 44. These are important pieces of the team. Slavkovsky, 39 games. They need these young players to get the proper reps to be able to do it. And like, even guys who you want to flip at the deadline, I know they got a first-round pick to take Sean Monahan, but when that guy's in the lineup, he can be a very good player, but can he healthy enough where you can flip him at the deadline and get another pick for him? He had 17 points in 25 games last year before being shut down for the rest of the season. So a lot of question marks in Montreal. You have them out of the playoffs, I'd imagine.
I know 100%. Like, if this team made the playoffs, that would, like, give Marty St. Louis the Coach of the Year award, like, right now. Like, this is not a playoff roster, not a playoff team, and if they can somehow, put it together to get in, he definitely deserves it. No, I mean, this isn't a team that's going to make the playoffs. I think they're over-under set at 71.5 points, which is one of the lowest ones in the entire NHL, I believe. So certainly within the Eastern Conference. I probably would give them the over on that, though, just because it is, such a low point total. How many points did they have last year, actually? 68. So, like, on par with what happened last year. And we just talked about the amount of players who they missed last season, and they made a couple of additions. So I think that they're probably 3 points better this year than they were last season. So I will take the over of 71.5, but just slightly over.
Okay, there you have it. The Montreal Canadiens season preview. Let us know in the comments how you think we did in terms of projecting these teams. Do you have the Bruins, the Panthers, the Red Wings, Canadiens in or out of the playoffs? We'll get into some of the answers next week, as well as hear from our local experts on the biggest stories, as we are only 13 days away from opening night of the NHL season. For more, follow Locked On NHL wherever you download your podcasts. We're also free and available on YouTube. For Mike DiStefano from Locked On Leafs, I'm Ross Levitan from Locked On Senators, and this has been another weekly Eastern Conference edition of the Locked On NHL podcast. It's your team every day.